Christian Aguilar. In September 2012, an 18-year-old disappeared without a trace in Gainesville. What started as a missing persons case rapidly escalated into a chilling investigation involving jealousy, fixation, and pre-planned violence. Christian Aguilar was born on November 16, 1993, in Miami-Dade County, specifically in the city of Doral, Florida. He was the oldest son of Carlos and Claudia Aguilar and was raised in a warm and affectionate home alongside his younger brother. Christian completed his early schooling at Doral Academy Preparatory School. He envisioned making an impact on the world through science and technology and aimed to become a biomedical engineer. In pursuit of this ambition, Christian made an important move forward by enrolling at the University of Florida in Gainesville, situated in Alachua County. Beyond his studies, Christian lived a typical social life for someone his age. He was in a relationship with Erica Freeman. On September 20, 2012, concern quickly arose when Christian's girlfriend could not reach him despite repeatedly calling and sending numerous text messages. Her anxiety deepened as more time went by without any reply, leading her to contact authorities and formally report him missing. The search for Christian swiftly gained momentum. The police were joined by his heartbroken family members, close friends, and many concerned community volunteers. Together, they searched various areas in and around Gainesville, hoping to locate any trace of Christian. Their efforts even involved aerial surveillance, as an air unit was deployed to cover broader areas in the search for evidence. Despite the expanding scope of the search, days went by without any sign of Christian. With each passing day, the feeling of fear among his loved ones intensified. Yet they refused to lose hope. Flyers were handed out, search teams were coordinated, and prayers were offered continuously. The community came together, holding firmly to the belief that Christian would be located safely and returned home. Tragically, that hope was destroyed on the afternoon of October 12th, when a group of hunters came across a gruesome discovery in a secluded wooded area of Levy County. The partially buried remains they discovered were later identified through dental records as Christian's. The location where the body was found was remote, adding a chilling dimension to an already heartbreaking situation. Christian's remains were sent for further evaluation, and a medical examination was carried out to determine the cause of death. The autopsy exposed a horrifying reality. Christian's life had been taken due to poisoning and strangulation. There were fluids present in his lungs. These findings confirmed that his disappearance had not been accidental, but was the outcome of a violent and intentional act. As the investigation into Christian's disappearance continued, authorities concentrated on the last known individual to have seen him, Pedro Bravo. Pedro was soon brought in for questioning. During his first interview, he told police that he had been struggling with thoughts of ending his own life and had contacted Christian for emotional assistance. He acknowledged that they had experienced a few disagreements while together and added a peculiar detail. A random hitchhiker had allegedly joined them in the car for part of the journey. To confirm his account, authorities asked Pedro to guide them through the precise route he and Christian had taken on the day he vanished. Soon afterward, Pedro was taken into custody under a 72-hour hold, described as a precaution to ensure he did not pose a threat to himself. While detained, Pedro underwent a second round of questioning. This time, investigators observed inconsistencies in his narrative. He admitted that the disagreement between him and Christian had intensified into a physical confrontation after the alleged hitchhiker was dropped off, representing a notable shift from his earlier account. Investigators began examining the relationship between Christian and Pedro more closely. They quickly learned that the strain between the two extended beyond a minor disagreement. Before Christian began a relationship with Erica Freeman, she had previously been involved with Pedro. All three had attended the same high school in Doral, Florida. Erica and Pedro ended their relationship in 2012 during their senior year, shortly before Erica enrolled at Santa Fe Community College. Christian and Erica began seeing one another not long after starting college, but out of respect and concern, they decided to keep their relationship concealed from Pedro. Their attempts to keep the relationship private failed. Pedro eventually learned the truth through mutual friends, and the revelation reportedly left him feeling betrayed. Investigators discovered that Pedro had taken the breakup poorly, and learning that Erica had moved on with Christian only intensified his anger. His mental health, already deteriorating, continued to decline further. Using his emotional struggles as a cover, Pedro reached out to Christian under the pretense of seeking support. Investigators believed this was part of a deliberate plan to draw Christian into a vulnerable position. With evident signs indicating a motive, authorities escalated their efforts to collect evidence. One alarming detail caught the detectives' attention: Pedro's absence of genuine concern for Christian's welfare. Based on this and additional findings, they charged him with failure to render aid and obtained a search warrant for his vehicle. During the search, they discovered traces of dirt and limestone in the undercarriage, which were later confirmed to match soil from Levy County, the same region where Christian's remains had been located. A Gatorade bottle and a roll of duct tape were also recovered and sent for testing. Subsequent searches produced further incriminating evidence. At Pedro's residence, investigators found a receipt documenting the recent purchase of a shovel. Looking further, they examined his personal journal and uncovered disturbing details, entries that revealed his fixation on rekindling his relationship with Erica and his belief that removing Christian was essential to accomplishing that objective. The writings outlined a disturbing scheme, confirming what investigators had started to suspect. Pedro Bravo had allegedly arranged Christian's disappearance driven by jealousy, anger, and heartbreak. On September 24, 2012, Pedro was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. As the case advanced, law enforcement received toxicology results showing that the Gatorade bottle recovered from Pedro's vehicle contained traces of sedatives, specifically acetaminophen and diphenhydramine. Pedro stated that the substances were meant for ending his own life, but authorities regarded the explanation skeptically given the mounting evidence against him. Further examination of Pedro's phone records revealed that his device had registered for several hours in the parking lot of a Walmart located on Northwest 13th Street on the night Christian disappeared. This was the same site where surveillance footage recorded Pedro buying several suspicious items, including a shovel, duct tape, and a knife, items investigators believed were directly connected to the disposal of Christian's body. Investigators concluded that Pedro's deep-seated obsession with Erica ultimately motivated him to take the life of his former friend. They believed he had poisoned and strangled Christian in or near the Walmart area before transporting the body to an isolated site in Levy County. There, he dug a shallow grave and buried Christian's remains, attempting to eliminate all evidence of his crime. Pedro Bravo's trial commenced on August 5, 2014. Prosecutors presented the physical evidence recovered from Pedro's car, Christian's remains, and Pedro's Walmart purchases. Numerous witnesses testified during the trial, many highlighting Pedro's intense fixation on Erica and his jealousy regarding her relationship with Christian. Erica herself testified, describing Pedro as a sociopath and expressing her disbelief that someone she had once known so closely could commit such a horrific act. She spoke about how deliberate and personal the crime felt, fueled by Pedro's unwillingness to release the past. The trial also included chilling testimony from one of Pedro's former cellmates, who asserted that Pedro had confessed to taking Christian's life. According to the inmate, Pedro confessed to using a moving strap to strangle Christian, and it had taken him 13 minutes to complete the act. The disturbing detail further reinforced the prosecution's claim that this was a deliberate and cold-blooded offense. After thorough deliberation, the jury found Pedro Bravo guilty, along with several additional charges, including false imprisonment, poisoning, and tampering with physical evidence. On August 15th, he received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although he continued to maintain his innocence in court, a letter later obtained from his time in prison revealed a moment of self-examination in which he described himself as a monster for harming Christian. Pedro submitted an appeal in 2016, but the court denied his arguments. A decade after being convicted of taking his high school best friend's life, Pedro sought to reverse his life sentence through an elaborate scheme involving fabricated testimony and covert communications. In 2025, Kelsey Edwards falsely asserted that she had seen Christian alive after his altercation with Pedro. Michelangelo, who had previously testified that Pedro confessed to the crime while incarcerated, retracted his statement. Authorities uncovered a series of messages and Cash App transactions between Pedro and Kelsey, exposing that the entire effort was a plot orchestrated by Pedro from prison. Angelo acknowledged that he had lied and received a 7-year prison sentence. Edwards, who also provided false statements during the case, was sentenced to 5 years of probation after pleading guilty to fraud. As part of the unsuccessful attempt to overturn his conviction, Pedro privately admitted to Edwards that Christian had died in his car during a confrontation. He ultimately confessed more than 10 years after the crime. In March 2025, Pedro ended his own life inside the Okeechobee Correctional Institution. Moving on to the next case. Christina Tina Marie Torney Sandoval in Greeley, Colorado, a 23-year-old medical attendant named Tina Torney Sandoval began a journey of love and marriage with her high school sweetheart, John Sandoval. Little did she know that her life would soon become entangled in a web of mystery and deceit. The seemingly ideal couple married shortly after graduation, and their life together appeared to be the beginning of a fairy tale romance. But life took a tragic turn for Tina on the fateful day of October 19, 1995. After completing an overnight shift at the North Colorado Medical Center, Tina informed her co-workers and her sister, Susan Torney, that she planned to meet John after work. She was supposed to call her sister immediately after the meeting, around noon, but the phone call never came. Concerned, Susan asked their mother to drive by John's house to check on Tina. John's aunt, who was subletting the basement of the home at the time, opened the door for them. She was uncertain about the couple's whereabouts, as neither had been home for some time. Unable to reach Tina or John, the worried family went to the local police station to file a missing persons report. For the next 22 years, no one knew Tina Sandoval's whereabouts. Investigators repeatedly ran into dead ends, which would ultimately lead them to her burial site in 2017. She was discovered beneath the remains of another body, buried under one of the graves at Sunset Memorial Garden Cemetery. Questions remained. What happened to Tina on October 19th? Where had she been for 22 years? And most importantly, how had she ended up in a grave at the cemetery in Greeley? Christina Tina Marie Torney Sandoval was born to Michael and Mary Ellen Torney in Windsor, Colorado. She graduated from Windsor High School on March 17, 1972, where she lettered in track, volleyball, basketball, and the Knowledge Bowl. Additionally, Tina played the trumpet in the school band and sang in the choir. She was the second of 9 children and grew up caring for her younger siblings. Helping and caring for others came naturally to her, and she earned an associate degree in nursing from Ames Community College. While attending college, Tina met John Sandoval, who was studying to become a radiology technician. Tina earned her BS in nursing from the University of Northern Colorado while working weekends as a licensed practical nurse at Northern Colorado Medical Center. She and John maintained a relationship and married in the Colorado Rockies on December 31, 1991. The couple exchanged vows in a stunning chapel, and John toasted his new bride as the best woman a man could ever ask for. For Tina, the marriage seemed straight out of a perfect fairy tale, but it was not to last. From the outside, the marriage appeared ideal, yet something sinister lurked beneath the surface. Tina began to notice alarming changes in John's behavior as their marriage deteriorated. The kind man she had met in college was, in fact, a predator who prowled Colorado neighborhoods at night. Tina confided in some colleagues at the medical center about her estranged husband, who suffered from voyeurism. He allegedly followed women at convenience stores, stalking them for days. John would go out late at night to peek through windows, and Tina claimed he even entered victims' homes, hiding in cupboards or under beds to watch without being detected. On occasion, John stole women's underwear, bringing them home as trophies. Police were repeatedly called to the Sandoval residence to question him following complaints. By the summer of 1995, Tina had reached her limit and filed for divorce. She confided in her sister Susan that occasionally John would rise in the middle of the night and leave their bed to crawl through the neighbors' backyards in order to peer into their windows. In a separate conversation with a friend from nursing, Tina mentioned that it was not uncommon for John to follow a woman home from the store and then observe her for several days. The deteriorating marriage and John's faltering career were sufficient red flags for Tina to initiate divorce proceedings and move out just 2 years after their wedding. She resolved to secure an apartment of her own as a means of restarting her life. However, that did not prevent John from approaching her. Tina recounted seeing John parked outside her apartment complex for hours. He had even climbed onto the deck of her apartment from the staircase leading up to her front door, watching her from there and reporting everything he observed. Tina's sister Susan shared this in an interview. Tina disclosed to her family that John had once placed a gun to his head in a dramatic and extreme attempt to salvage their marriage. She also confided in her physician regarding her concerns for her safety from her estranged husband. Despite these unsettling encounters, Tina, only 23 years old at the time, looked forward to beginning her new life. She intended to leave her past with John behind as she embarked on independent living, though her newly started journey would be interrupted sooner than she anticipated. After completing an overnight shift at the hospital on October 19, 1995, Tina informed her co-workers and sister of her intention to meet with John to definitively close the chapter of their marriage. I told her I was very concerned because of everything he had been doing, following her and behaving inappropriately with other women again, Susan said. Tina had planned to update her sister with a call around noon, but that call never occurred. As Susan and their mother became increasingly uneasy about the unfolding events, they resolved to go to her apartment to check on her. Since Susan was still at work, she asked their mother, Mary Torney, to go check on Tina. Mary went to Tina's apartment and discovered that Tina was not there. Her anxiety mounting, she immediately went to John's residence. John was living with his aunt at the time, and the door was answered by her. She refused entry and insisted to the family that Tina had never been there. Mary noticed her daughter's jacket left behind in the apartment, but John's aunt demanded they leave, claiming that neither Tina nor anyone else had been present at the house. As soon as Mary exited the apartment, she called Susan, and together they promptly contacted the local police to investigate the situation. The unsettling sequence of events raised numerous questions, yet with no evidence, John remained free of suspicion. Detective Keith Olson said, "We initiated a full investigation immediately. The police conducted an extensive search for Tina. Signs indicated that she had indeed returned from her hospital shift, evidenced by her nurse's uniform and the room showing no disturbance. The only irregularity was that her car was missing. This prompted authorities to search the surrounding area for any trace of Tina or her vehicle. On October 20th, 1995, at 3 a.m., police found Tina's car parked just 4 blocks from John's residence. With the assistance of search dogs, investigators tracked her scent from the vehicle all the way to John's apartment. With suspicion mounting and police awareness of John's prior behavior, it became increasingly apparent that he was implicated in Tina's disappearance. Investigators assigned a plainclothes officer to wait outside John's home until he returned. At 4:45 a.m., the officer radioed detectives upon John's arrival. Detectives swiftly drove to the location and found John already in the shower. The officer presumed he was attempting to wash away any remaining evidence. When confronted by the police swarm, John tried to flee by jumping out of a bedroom window. However, this effort ended unsuccessfully, and he was apprehended by force. While searching the premises, officers found muddy clothing, a pail, rope, a carpenter's level, and a flashlight attached to a lanyard in John's car, along with several of Tina's credit cards inside his residence. Investigators executed a search warrant to examine the most recent transactions on Tina's credit cards. There had been no activity on the cards for 4 days prior to her disappearance. When John was brought to the station, detectives observed several fresh scratch marks on his face, neck, chest, and shoulders, apparently caused by fingernails. During the interrogation, he attempted to destroy evidence by cleaning and biting his fingernails. Despite the heavy suspicion, police never recovered a body, a definitive crime scene, or any witnesses, and John refused to provide any information regarding her disappearance. Consequently, the district attorney at that time did not press charges. John was taken into custody on an unrelated trespassing charge. The absence of circumstantial evidence hindered the investigation into Tina. He continually denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance and promptly requested a lawyer. Although denying responsibility for the disappearance, John pleaded guilty to the trespassing charge and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was released in 1999 after serving just over 4 years and relocated to Las Vegas, Nevada. For the following 10 years, detectives and Tina's family continued searching for her, but they had no leads and no clues regarding her whereabouts. In December 2001, a judge determined there was sufficient evidence to declare Tina dead, and the state of Colorado issued a death certificate in 2002. In 2009, the haunting case of Tina Sandoval received renewed attention after a new district attorney reviewed it and agreed to pursue the matter. An arrest warrant was issued for John at his Las Vegas residence. Investigators made a disturbing discovery. John had 2 portraits of Tina in which she wore a small black dress, prominently displayed on the wall. Detective Mike Prill also reported uncovering more than 100 VHS tapes and 70 mini VHS tapes of John filming women along the Las Vegas Strip. In one disturbing video, Prill stated that John followed a woman to her room and entered when she failed to lock the door. Inside, as 4 women slept, John filmed them for 17 minutes before gradually removing the sheets from one woman and allegedly assaulting her, Prill said. John was never charged for any of his activities in Las Vegas, but he was convicted of first-degree murder in connection with his wife's death, based on the unsettling evidence discovered in his Las Vegas home. Even though investigators had not uncovered any new evidence, the prosecution charged John with first-degree murder, and he was taken into custody on June 18, 2009. He entered a plea of not guilty, yet a jury ultimately convicted him and sentenced him to life without parole on August 5, 2010. One of the key witnesses for the prosecution was Jesse Martinez, a cousin of John's. According to reports, Jesse and Tina had begun a relationship 1 month before she separated from her husband. Jesse assisted in persuading the jury, alleging that John had stalked Tina and murdered her. Prior victims of John, along with the officers who investigated those cases, also testified against him, contributing to the conviction. However, the matter was not fully resolved, as authorities continued searching for Tina's body. In an unexpected development, the Colorado Court of Appeals overturned John's conviction on March 17, 2016. Court documents indicated that there had been several technical issues, and a new trial date was scheduled. While the district attorney's office was preparing for this new trial, John agreed to disclose the location of Tina's remains in exchange for a plea agreement. Nearly 22 years after Tina's disappearance, on March 22, 2017, he informed the police that he had hidden his estranged wife's corpse at Sunset Memorial Garden Cemetery in Greeley. Tina had been interred all along beneath the grave of Arthur Hurt, a World War II veteran. Hurt's family granted permission to exhume his remains, revealing Tina's body buried approximately 2 feet below the surface. Under the terms of the plea deal, John received a sentence of 25 years for second-degree murder. However, he refused to explain to authorities how he had killed his wife or why he committed the crime. His next parole hearing is scheduled for 2026, but Tina's family is actively working to prevent his release. The case of Tina Sandoval remains unique in its circumstances. The merciless actions of John and his lack of conscience demonstrate the traits of a cold-blooded murderer. To imagine living under the same roof with such a person for years is nothing short of a nightmare. Tina's youth was tragically stolen due to a series of unfortunate events, a loss her family will carry for a lifetime. The tragic death of Tina Torney Sandoval stands as a warning that sometimes the person we consider our own can be the devil in disguise. The law has historically been lenient in matters of marital conflict, often refraining from taking direct action at the cost of vulnerable lives like Tina's. Perhaps if local authorities had provided closer oversight, her murder might have been prevented. Yet John had been living under the guise of a respectable man, concealing his true nature from society. Each year, thousands of marriages disintegrate, and many of these tragic stories end in death. The 23-year-old aspiring nurse had her life cruelly cut short before she had the chance to fully experience it. We extend our deepest condolences to her family and hope they find solace. We also urge all viewers to remain vigilant regarding those they choose as life partners. Moving on to the next case. Doreen and Helen. It was a day like any other in the quiet town of Gormley, Ontario. Albert Morley arrived home expecting a cheerful hug from his wife and son, but an unnatural silence hung in the air as he entered the house. Then his son's scream shattered the quiet. He rushed inside and discovered his wife, Doreen Morby, lying in a pool of blood on the floor. Police were called to the scene and learned that she had been assaulted and shot 7 times while they searched for the perpetrator. Just days later, another woman named Helen Ferguson, not far from the Morbys, suffered the same unspeakable ordeal. Was this a random act of violence, or a sadistic serial killer stalking their peaceful town? But before investigating the identity of the killer, let's take a closer look at the Morby family. Back in the 1970s, life had been good for the Morby family. Albert and Doreen, a young couple, had just purchased their own house in the quiet town of Gormley. Owning a home, there was a sign of stability and success. The neighborhood was safe, with many young families around. Doreen was a kind and caring woman who had given up her nursing career to stay home with their 1.5-year-old son, Brent. She was 34 years old at the time. Life was fulfilling for the couple, and the future seemed full of promise, but they could not have anticipated what awaited them on May 6, 1970. A little after 5 in the evening, Albert returned home after a routine grocery shopping trip. Immediately, something felt wrong. The door, unlike most homes in Gormley at the time, was locked. Albert found this strange, as people in the town usually trusted one another and did not lock their doors. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was silent except for the terrified cries of his son coming from down the hallway. Panic surged as he raced toward the sound of Brent's voice. The phone in the kitchen dangled uselessly off the hook, causing Albert to fear the worst. He found Brent unharmed, but clearly shaken in the bedroom. Yet the sight that awaited him next was horrifying. Doreen, his wife, lay face down in a pool of blood, her hands seemingly clutching the back of her head. Fear gripped Albert as he lifted Brent and ran to a neighbor's house to call the police. The weight of the tragedy was settling upon him. The happy life they had known was gone, replaced by a nightmare that would forever scar the Morby family. When the police arrived at the Morby household, they were met with a grim scene of blood and confusion. Observing the blood around Doreen's head, it initially appeared she might have fallen and injured herself. But due to the amount of blood, her wound was not immediately clear. The officers did not suspect foul play at first, and her body was sent to the medical examiner's office for a detailed examination. While awaiting the doctor's report, investigators scoured the house for clues. The scene in the kitchen suggested there had been a struggle, leading them to question whether Doreen had really fallen by accident. Although uncertain at first, detectives began to consider the possibility that someone had killed her. They dusted the house for fingerprints and collected hair, fibers, and blood samples from the room where Doreen had been found. The next day, the doctor's report delivered grim news no one had anticipated. The examining physician noted injuries on her hands indicating she had tried to defend herself. Worse, the doctor stated she had been assaulted before being shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber revolver. The pathologist also found something unusual. 7.22 caliber bullets had been extracted from her body, 2 from her back and 5 from her head. This was peculiar, as most revolvers held only 6 bullets, meaning the perpetrator had to reload the gun before firing the 7th shot. Detectives noted that shooting 7 times was highly atypical. They researched various revolver types and discovered that a rare model could hold 9 bullets. With this information, they revisited their list of suspects and scrutinized Albert Morby more closely. He drew attention because he was the first person questioned about what had happened to Doreen. Albert stated that he had left their house at 8 o'clock that morning to go to his job as a teacher. He cooperated fully with the police and consented to provide a blood sample for testing. In 1970, however, detectives did not have the advantage of DNA analysis to solve crimes as they do today. When investigators found a sample from Doreen's test kit, they could only determine the killer's blood type, which was type A. This offered limited help, as roughly 1/3 of people share type A blood, but it was insufficient to identify the perpetrator. Consequently, detectives had to rely on traditional methods. They went door to door throughout the neighborhood, asking residents about their whereabouts and seeking DNA samples. The people of Gormley were terrified, as they had never experienced such a brutal murder so close to home. Gun sales surged, since at the time firearms could be purchased without a background check. Little did they know that their worst fears would soon be realized when another devastating murder occurred just 13 days later. On May 19, 1970, detectives were still investigating the first murder when they received a call. A frightened 9-year-old boy, Dale Ferguson, reported that someone had just killed his mother. Police rushed to the scene and found 37-year-old Helen Ferguson dead. She was lying in a pool of her own blood, shot once in the back of the head and twice in the back with a .22 caliber gun. The details were chillingly similar to Doreen's unsolved murder from days before. As with Doreen, Helen had been shot in the same manner. An autopsy confirmed she had been assaulted and that her attacker had type A blood. The investigation took an even stranger turn when authorities learned that Helen was a nurse, married to a school teacher, just like the first victim. When questioned, her husband, Russell Ferguson, provided an alibi similar to Albert Morby's in the earlier case, stating he had been at work during the murder. There was, however, one crucial difference. This time, the police had a witness, Helen's son, Dale. He was 8 years old and had been homesick with mumps while his 2 siblings were at school. Dale recalled that just after lunch, the family dog began barking, and there was a knock at the door. He heard a man's voice claiming he had a sick child in the car and urgently needed Helen's assistance. The man may have wanted to use the phone or have Helen write down directions to the hospital. While Dale remained in the living room watching television, he heard his mother and the man go downstairs. Moments later, 3 loud gunshots rang out. The man returned upstairs and passed Dale's room. Realizing a child was present, he stared at Dale for a few seconds before fleeing. Miraculously, Dale survived. The attacker's face was seared into his memory. Dale also remembered a critical detail about what the killer had done to conceal evidence. Police took Dale to the station, and despite his trauma, he provided a highly detailed description of the suspect. He even recalled the getaway car, a white or tan 1960s station wagon. Using this information, authorities created a sketch of the suspect and his vehicle, which was distributed across cities in Canada. The police were inundated with tips, hoping one would lead to the killer. Investigators focused on the peculiar connection between the 2 victims, both former nurses married to teachers. However, despite extensive efforts, no link between the families was found. The case remained a chilling mystery. 2 seemingly random murders with a strikingly similar pattern. The situation grew so serious that the Ontario Provincial Police were called in. Fear of a serial killer on the loose had gripped the community after 2 vicious murders in less than 2 weeks. Residents believed the killer would not stop. People double-locked their doors, and some men began working from home to ensure their wives were never alone. Authorities offered a substantial reward of $15,000, roughly equivalent to $100,000 today, for any information leading to an arrest. A year passed, and no new murders appeared to be connected to the perpetrator, who had been dubbed the .22 caliber killer by the media. During the first year of investigation, police interviewed over 10,000 individuals and examined more than 3,200 suspects across Canada. Despite the massive resources devoted to the case, the task force assigned to the murders was disbanded after a year with no significant leads. The .22 caliber killer case remained unsolved, leaving a lingering sense of unease and a community desperate for answers. The case stayed cold for several years. Then, in 1973, a glimmer of hope emerged. A landlady called the tip line to report that one of her former tenants, Donald Apostle, closely resembled the police sketch. Not only that, he had previously owned a beige station wagon, matching the getaway car described by Dale. Donald was known in the community as someone troubled by mental illness and a history of violent behavior. Rumors circulated that he had boasted about committing horrific acts. He was currently confined in a mental institution in eastern Canada, coincidentally near one of the murder locations. The police investigated his former residence, situated not far from the crime scene. During the search, a chilling find was made, a handcrafted child's coffin hidden in the shed. This evidence painted a deeply disturbing picture. Detectives traveled to the mental institution to collect a DNA sample from Donald. However, his responses to their questions were incoherent, leaving them frustrated and empty-handed. Nevertheless, they succeeded in obtaining his saliva sample for testing. 2 weeks later, the results were received. Donald's blood type was A, which corresponded with the killer's. The fact that he was now institutionalized far away explained the absence of further murders. Yet a major obstacle remained. He was declared unfit to stand trial due to his mental condition. While the case officially remained unsolved, the police ceased actively pursuing other suspects and were convinced that he was the perpetrator. Years went by, and despite a strong belief among many residents that Donald was the killer, the victims' families sought definitive closure. By 1996, forensic science had undergone a revolution. With this advancement, the Ferguson family approached the police to request a renewed investigation. Although Donald Apostle, the original suspect, had died from brain cancer, the families wanted closure through DNA testing. Fortunately, samples collected from both crime scenes had been preserved. However, when Donald Apostle's DNA was compared to the killer's profile, it did not match. This news, while disappointing, offered a silver lining. Investigators now possessed a complete DNA profile of the actual killer. CODIS, the National DNA Database, was not yet operational in Canada. Although they could not run a profile through a nationwide system, they now had a definitive genetic fingerprint, a far more powerful tool than merely knowing blood type. Ontario Provincial Police, investigating the .22 caliber case, received a call that reignited the decades-old inquiry. It came from the Sault Ste. Marie Police Department, a city roughly 400 miles north of Gormley. At that time, Sault Ste. Marie had been experiencing a series of armed robberies at jewelry stores since June 1995. According to witness descriptions, the perpetrator bore a striking resemblance to the sketch of the .22 caliber killer. After several robberies, the local police obtained a clear sketch of the suspect. A breakthrough occurred when police received a significant lead from a pawn shop. Security footage showed the man pawning the ring and, crucially, using his real driver's license for identification. This led them to Ronald Glenn West. Detectives obtained a search warrant for West's residence, where stolen jewelry was discovered. Ronald West was arrested and pleaded guilty to the robberies on August 5, 1995. He was convicted on 5 counts of armed robbery and sentenced to a 10-year term at Kingston Penitentiary. However, a new development emerged. His former house was undergoing renovations, and the new owners made a startling discovery hidden in the bathroom ceiling: women's jewelry, nude photographs, and an envelope resembling the sketches. Coupled with the incriminating items found in West's former residence, the police suspected they might have apprehended the man all of Ontario had been searching for. The tip from Sault Ste. Marie Police appeared promising. OPP investigators visited Ronald West to determine if he was the man they had been pursuing for over 20 years. A key detail for the investigators was his previous residence. Ronald had grown up near Gormley, giving him familiarity with the area during the 1970s. As they investigated further, even more chilling details surfaced. Between 1968 and 1972, Ronald Glenn West had served as a police officer with the Toronto Police Department's 53rd Division. He had voluntarily left the force in 1972. Coincidentally, his work record indicated days off on May 6 and May 19, the exact dates of the 2 murders. Police believed West might even have been part of the task force in 1999 that investigated the very case he was now a prime suspect in. In 1995, Ronald West was 52 years old, unemployed, and living with his second wife. To pass the time, West wrote letters, including one addressed to his wife in Toronto. This letter became a light bulb moment for the detectives, who were in desperate need of his DNA. After analyzing the partial DNA profile, the examiner reached a conclusion. Then, with a court order, the police were able to obtain a blood sample from West. The results were definitive. Ronald West's DNA matched the DNA profile recovered from both crime scenes. The decades-old .22 caliber killer case finally had a suspect, and a former police officer at that. On August 26, 1999, justice was finally realized. After nearly 30 years, the families of Doreen and Helen received some solace as Ronald West was charged with first-degree murder in both cases. The apprehension of West opened a new chapter in the investigation. Police began re-examining unsolved crimes throughout Ontario, searching for potential connections to West. He had evaded capture for more than 2 decades and seemingly continued his criminal activity. He even displayed a twisted sense of pride, keeping stolen jewelry and a gun permit as trophies, hidden in his bathroom ceiling. In 2002, just 5 days before his trial, Ronald Glenn West pleaded guilty to the murders of Doreen Morby and Helen Ferguson. Yet his motive and the reason for targeting these specific victims remained unknown. Sentenced to 2 life terms with a minimum parole eligibility of 10 years, West showed no remorse throughout the proceedings, leaving the families without answers. At that time, it was the oldest cold case ever resolved in Canadian history. Ronald Glenn West is still suspected in numerous other unsolved murders across Canada. He frequently moved between cities and is believed to be connected to several murders in Ottawa and possibly even in British Columbia, where he traveled after the Ontario killings. As of today, he remains incarcerated, although the exact prison is uncertain. At one point, he was held at Millhaven Institution, a maximum security facility near Kingston, Ontario, housing some of Canada's most dangerous criminals. Doreen and Helen, 2 lives stolen, 2 families left devastated. For years, the search for their killer felt like an endless nightmare. But thanks to signs that never ceased and detectives who never gave up, justice eventually arrived. Yet Ronald West's capture represents only a step. Justice may have been achieved for Doreen and Helen, but the struggle to uncover the truth in unsolved cases continues. This chilling story serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice never sleeps. And for every life taken, there will be an unrelenting quest for the truth. Moving on to the next case. Dorothy Jean Williams. In December 1966, a woman entered a California fire station seeking assistance, then vanished into the night. 3 months later, her body was discovered. For nearly 60 years, she remained unidentified as a Jane Doe. In early 1967, a woman's body was located on a cliffside by a hunter along the edge of a roadway in Tiburon, California. The woman was never identified and remained known only as the Marin County Jane Doe. In early 2023, 74-year-old Penelope Vaillancourt chose to take a mail-in DNA test. She signed up for an ancestry website, never anticipating that it would reveal the truth she had pursued since she was a teenager. She was searching for her missing mother, Dorothy Vaillancourt. Penelope remembered that her DNA was then entered into a growing genealogical database utilized by forensic investigators. Unaware to Penelope, her second cousin Danielle Williams in Tasmania, Australia, was also working to uncover the truth. After learning about the identification of a Jane Doe in California, Danielle researched her family's background, tracing marriage records that connected Dorothy to Francois Vaillancourt. That search led her to obituaries and burial notices, which ultimately revealed the names of Dorothy's children. Danielle stated that her finding on the Ancestry website confirmed that the long unidentified Jane Doe was Dorothy. What began as an attempt to understand her own ancestry turned into solving a mystery that had troubled 2 branches of a family for generations. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Marin County Sheriff's Office collaborated with Othram, a forensic laboratory that employs advanced DNA testing and genealogical methods to identify unknown individuals. Using the genetic profile created from Dorothy's remains, Othram developed a family tree and traced distant relatives. Their conclusions aligned with the research completed by Danielle and confirmed what Penelope had unknowingly helped achieve, a breakthrough in the decades-old case. Dorothy Jean Williams was born in Tasmania in August 1917. During World War II, Dorothy worked as a nurse in Sydney, where she later met Francois Arthur Vaillancourt, a United States serviceman. The two were married in Victoria in 1943. A published article describing their wedding detailed how Dorothy wore a handmade lace gown with a full-length veil cut in tailored lines, presenting a clear image of elegance and tradition. After the ceremony, Dorothy changed into a black dress and a fur coat, accessorized with a blue velvet handbag and a matching hat. Following the war, the couple moved to the United States and settled in San Francisco. There, they grew their family, having 7 children together. Despite their hopeful beginning, the family's unity began to fall apart. Dorothy and Francois eventually divorced, and Dorothy's life declined as she battled alcoholism. This resulted in her placement in a halfway house. Dorothy later remarried a man named Herman Hess, and the family relocated to Marin County in California. However, the new home was not a sanctuary. According to Penelope, communication with her mother ended after a violent incident in their residence. She claimed that both she and her brother were physically assaulted by their stepfather during this confrontation. Dorothy's deteriorating condition and inability to sustain stable employment meant that her children could no longer stay in her custody. Consequently, they were placed in various orphanages throughout San Francisco. The separation from her children signified a major decline in Dorothy's personal situation. Without a dependable support network and struggling with personal challenges, her life grew increasingly unstable. The last confirmed sighting of Dorothy took place in December 1966. On that day, she went into a fire station and requested money, either for a taxi or for a place to stay overnight. The firefighter on duty refused her request, and the last time he saw her, she was walking away down the street. That sighting would become the final known moment of Dorothy's life. What occurred after that night remains unknown. 3 months after her final sighting at the fire station in December 1966, Dorothy was deceased, although her family was unaware. Penelope was only 15 years old when she lost contact with her mother after leaving their unstable home in California in 1965. In March 2025, when Penelope was finally told about her mother's fate, she stated, "I hate it so much, I really do." Despite the identification, important questions remain unanswered. The precise cause of Dorothy's death has never been established. Some family members believe that a man Dorothy had once been romantically involved with may have been involved, but no solid evidence has emerged. For Penelope, the questions continue to linger painfully. She asked, "I do not know how she ended up there. Was her life taken? Did someone strike her with a car? Did she slip and fall?" Moving on to the next case. Jimmy Allen Dollison. In 1972, a 16-year-old departed from his home in Kansas City, Kansas, and never came back. A report for a missing person was submitted, but a major development in the investigation would not occur until many years later. On April 18, 1973, a disturbing discovery occurred 3 miles southeast of Garnett, Kansas, along 1550 Road. The decaying remains of an unidentified male were located in an isolated area. The setting and state of the body indicated that the individual had been deceased for a considerable period. It marked an important development, but without definitive identification, the finding created more uncertainties than resolutions. The unidentified male was discovered wearing a brown corduroy jacket, a green long-sleeved button-down shirt, jeans, and a black leather belt featuring a large buckle. His attire also consisted of brown hiking boots and a navy blue stocking cap. Multiple pieces of jewelry were discovered on the body, including 2 gold rings engraved with crosses, a ring bearing the number 78, and a silver chain with a large cross. These personal belongings were carefully documented in detail, in the hope that someone might recognize them and assist in identifying the victim. An autopsy was performed, and the coroner officially concluded that the man's death resulted from evident signs of trauma. According to forensic evaluation, it was established that the victim was likely about 20 years old, with brown hair and a slender physique. Despite the evidence obtained from the autopsy and the victim's clothing, the authorities were unable to determine his identity at that time. Over the years, law enforcement undertook numerous attempts to identify the remains and uncover more about what had happened to the young man. Investigators reviewed missing persons reports from throughout the state and beyond, hoping to find a match. Forensic sketches and reconstructions were created, and public appeals were issued, yet no definitive link was discovered that could assign a name to the victim or clarify the circumstances of his death. As time went on and leads were exhausted, the investigation gradually lost traction and became a cold case. In 2024, more than 5 decades after the remains were discovered, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation initiated a renewed effort to identify the remains found in 1973. With advancements in forensic technology, samples from the unidentified individual were submitted to OTHRM. This initiative was made possible through financial support provided by the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. By early 2025, a significant breakthrough surfaced. Testing conducted by OTHRM resulted in the identification of genetic relatives of the unknown man. This finding represented a substantial advancement in a case that had remained unresolved for over 5 decades. The results offered investigators renewed optimism and a clearer direction toward ultimately determining the victim's identity. Acting on the information revealed through forensic genealogy, agents from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and the Anderson County Sheriff's Office began searching for potential relatives. Their efforts led them to the siblings of the unidentified man. After conducting interviews and securing a DNA sample from one of the siblings, authorities submitted the sample for comparison. The DNA examination verified what had long remained uncertain. The remains were those of Jimmy Allen Dollison. After more than 50 years of ambiguity, Jimmy was no longer unidentified. Jimmy was born in 1956. In 1972, 16-year-old Jimmy was residing with his family in Kansas City, Kansas. The Dollison household was closely bonded, and Jimmy was surrounded by individuals who cared deeply for him. Concern rapidly escalated into fear when Jimmy did not return home. His parents, troubled by his absence and aware that this behavior was uncharacteristic, filed a missing persons report. Authorities treated the situation with seriousness and initiated an investigation to find the missing teenager. Police officers commenced an exhaustive search, canvassing neighborhoods, speaking with residents, and pursuing any leads that might provide insight into Jimmy's whereabouts. His family, who had endured decades of unanswered questions, ultimately received confirmation of what had happened to their cherished son and brother. With Jimmy's identity established, the focus of the case shifted. Local investigators and the Anderson County Sheriff's Office intensified their efforts to determine the circumstances surrounding his death. The case, long regarded as a nameless mystery, now had an identity, a family, and a background. Investigators began working to retrace Jimmy's last known movements and identify the individuals he had last been seen with. Authorities are reviewing old records, interviewing people who may have known Jimmy in the early 1970s, and seeking new information that could finally uncover who was responsible for ending his life. Officials urge anyone with information about the case to contact the KBI at 1-800-KS-CRIME. Moving on to the next case. Catherine Deveen's murder case. On the morning of December 6, 1973, a young couple performing cleanup duties at the McKinney campground in Washington stumbled upon something entirely unexpected: the cold, lifeless body of a young girl displaying violent and grotesque injuries. Her throat had been slit, portions of her clothing, including her pants and underwear, were torn apart, and both of her breasts had been mutilated. This was not merely another violation, it was barbaric. The pressing question arose: who could drive someone to commit such ruthless acts, and why? Immediately following the discovery, the couple rushed to the nearest telephone to alert authorities. Their frantic call summoned police from the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, who swiftly arrived at the scene, confronted with evidence suggesting a violent homicide. The victim, a young teenager, exhibited unmistakable signs of a brutal attack. Her throat had been savagely cut, and her clothing bore marks of a vicious assault. The pockets of her jacket had been cut out, indicating a possible intent to conceal or tamper with evidence. Furthermore, she was found wearing only one boot, the other missing. Signs of decomposition and animal disturbance around the body suggested that she may have been murdered elsewhere before being dumped at the campground. Despite the police's diligent efforts to gather evidence, the remote location of the crime scene posed significant challenges. There were no witnesses, footprints, or tire tracks to provide leads, leaving detectives with very little to work with in their search for the perpetrator. The investigation took a crucial turn when the medical examiner performed an autopsy on the victim. The cause of death was determined to be the deep cut to her throat. Biological material was collected during the autopsy, but due to the limitations of DNA technology at the time, there was no way to test it or use it in court proceedings. To identify the victim, police relied on traditional investigative methods. A sketch artist was commissioned to produce an image of the girl, which was distributed to police stations in the surrounding areas. Flyers featuring photographs of the victim's clothing were also circulated to the public in hopes of generating leads. The breakthrough occurred when detectives in Seattle contacted the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, noting similarities between the sketch and a missing 14-year-old girl named Catherine Deveen. Catherine's family recognized distinctive features on the victim's clothing, confirming her identity. Born on Christmas Day in 1958 to Bill Deveen and Sally and Deveen, Catherine aspired to become a minister and had a passion for caring for animals and people in need. Her mother described her as sweet and big-hearted, always willing to help those in need. Sally reported her missing on November 25, 1973, after Catherine failed to arrive at her cousin's house in Portland, where she had intended to visit following an argument with her boyfriend. With dental records confirming Catherine's identity, investigators vowed to exhaust every effort to find her killer and bring them to justice. The investigation progressed with detectives retracing her last known movements, following public appeals for information. Tips poured in from concerned citizens, many reporting sightings of Catherine allegedly entering a pickup truck. These reports provided critical leads for investigators. However, details varied, and despite extensive efforts, the driver of the truck remained unidentified. Detectives then focused their attention on Catherine's former boyfriend and a family friend as potential suspects. Thorough investigations ultimately cleared both individuals of suspicion. A significant development occurred when detectives searched the family friend's home, discovering newspaper clippings about Catherine's death and a knife with animal blood on it. While the friend had initially been considered a suspect, forensic analysis later ruled out the knife as the murder weapon. Despite this setback, detectives continued their investigation. Months passed, leads dwindled, and the case appeared to reach a standstill, leaving Catherine's family consumed by anguish and uncertainty. The investigation took a grim turn when similar murders of young women began occurring in the Seattle area around 1973 and and 1974. These cases bore a striking resemblance to Catherine's death, raising concerns of a potential serial killer operating in Washington. Detectives soon noticed another disturbing pattern among the victims. According to witnesses and tips, each victim had last been seen entering a vehicle, subjected to physical assault, and then murdered. During the inquiry into this string of murders, the name Ted Bundy emerged as a possible connection. Bundy was already a notorious serial killer, known to operate in the same time and area where Catherine had been residing. Although Bundy had confessed to numerous murders both before and after his arrest, he immediately denied involvement in Catherine's death during an interview with detectives on January 24, 1989. Despite the absence of concrete evidence linking Bundy to the crime, his presence cast a shadow of suspicion over the investigation, adding further complexity to the case. For nearly 3 decades, Catherine's murder remained unsolved, leaving her family in despair. In 2001, as DNA technology had advanced significantly, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office launched a final effort to solve Catherine's murder. A sample collected from Catherine's body nearly 30 years earlier was submitted to CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, as a last-ditch attempt to identify a potential match. Against all odds, a breakthrough occurred. There was a match. Once the DNA sample was entered into CODIS, it returned a result that was uniquely identifiable. The most shocking revelation was that the identified suspect was already serving a 48-year sentence for a physical assault committed just 2 years after Catherine's murder in 1975. The suspect was William Cosden Jr., also known as Billy. Born in 1947 in Seattle, Washington, Billy had a troubled upbringing marked by a penchant for trouble and cruelty. From an early age, he displayed disturbing behavior, including cruelty toward animals and a fascination with setting fires. His sisters, Karen and Susan, were the primary victims of his cruelty, enduring years of assault and psychological torment. Despite his troubling past, Billy largely evaded serious consequences. After dropping out of school, he joined the U.S. Marine Corps and was deployed to Vietnam. Upon returning, he continued his pattern of manipulation and abuse, terrorizing his family and preying on vulnerable individuals. He was even committed to a mental institution for rehabilitation for 4 years, yet his violent tendencies persisted. Upon release, he assaulted Karen again, instilling fear that kept her silent about his actions. Billy's modus operandi eventually involved using his younger sister Susan as bait to lure unsuspecting victims. Once inside his vehicle, he would drive for a while before stopping, turning up the music to drown out any sounds from the back, where Susan was locked. This enabled him to carry out his horrific acts without interference or detection. At the time of Catherine's disappearance, witnesses reported seeing Billy at the Rest Over truck stop in Tumwater, a notorious location for hitchhikers. He was observed wearing clothing that appeared to be stained with blood. Furthermore, sources indicated that blood was discovered inside his truck on the same day as Catherine Devine's murder. Eyewitness accounts reinforced the suspicion surrounding Billy, with individuals claiming to have seen Catherine getting into a pickup truck shortly before her tragic death. Additionally, it was reported that Billy's truck mysteriously caught fire soon after news of Catherine's disappearance broke, adding to the accumulating evidence against him. Despite his attempts to evade justice, law enforcement eventually caught up with him. On November 22, 1973, Thanksgiving, Billy used the snowy weather as an excuse to hunt for victims under the pretense of assisting stranded motorists. Ultimately, his reign of terror ended on July 20, 1977, when he was arrested for kidnapping and assault, resulting in a conviction and a 48-year sentence. The DNA match linking him to Catherine Devine's murder proved to be crucial evidence, connecting him to the crime and shedding light on one of the oldest murder cases in Washington state to utilize DNA evidence. This breakthrough brought closure to Catherine's family and underscored the significance of advancements in DNA technology for solving cold cases and holding perpetrators accountable. In addition to the DNA evidence, witness accounts and physical evidence, including a bloody boot matching Catherine's, further implicated Billy in the murder. Despite his denials, the overwhelming evidence against him presented a strong case for his guilt. Even with the passage of time, the pain of Catherine's loss remained deeply felt by her family. The trial offered the Devine family a bittersweet opportunity to confront Catherine's killer face to face. Sister Charlene described the experience as both devastating and empowering as they confronted the reality of Catherine's final moments. Finally, in March 2002, Billy was formally charged with Catherine's murder. William Cosden Jr.'s connection to the crime came to light while he was already serving time at McNeil Island Penitentiary for a separate assault conviction dating back to 1976. The Washington Crime Lab successfully linked DNA evidence from Catherine's case to Billy, illuminating the decades-old homicide. Following this, Billy was held on bail set at $500,000, and his trial was scheduled for May of the same year. During the proceedings, the evidence against him aligned, leading to his conviction for Catherine Devine's murder. Billy's defense team attempted to cast doubt on the significance of the DNA evidence, arguing that the mere presence of DNA at the crime scene did not necessarily implicate him in the homicide. Despite these efforts, the prosecution maintained that Billy was the perpetrator of Catherine's murder. The DNA evidence, combined with other circumstantial evidence and witness testimony, painted a clear picture of his involvement in the crime. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Despite his advanced age, he remains incarcerated, serving out his sentence. Lingering questions persist regarding the full extent of Billy's crimes and whether he may have had other victims. The shadow of uncertainty looms over his past actions, leaving open the possibility that Catherine was not his only victim. Sally Ann Devine, Catherine's mother, experienced a mixture of emotions when her daughter's murderer was finally charged and arrested. On one hand, there was relief that justice was finally being served after decades of uncertainty and pain. The arrest offered a glimmer of hope that the truth would emerge and that Catherine's killer would be held accountable for his actions. At the same time, Sally felt a profound sense of vindication. For decades, she had fought tirelessly to keep Catherine's case alive, never losing hope that the perpetrator would eventually face justice. Despite the tragic end to Catherine's life, her legacy endures through the cherished memories held by her family. Catherine's dreams of becoming a minister may have been tragically cut short, but the impact she had on those who knew her continues to resonate. Her family preserves her memory, ensuring that she is never forgotten. Moving on to the next case. Kenneth and Barbara Martin. On December 7, 1958, Kenneth and Barbara Martin departed from their home in Portland, Oregon with their 3 daughters, but the family never came back. For many years, the case remained unresolved. Kenneth Ken Martin was born on September 10, 1904, and Barbara Aileen Cable was born in February 1910. The two were married on November 28, 1929, and together they created a life grounded in love, family, and community. By 1958, they had 4 children: Donald, who was 28 years old, Barbara, lovingly known as Barbie, aged 14, Virginia, aged 13, and the youngest, Susan, who was only 11. The Martins resided in a comfortable 2-story Tudor-style house in Portland, Oregon. Each December, their street turned into a festive showcase of lights and decorations, earning it the name Candy Lane. This custom was one the Martins fully embraced. Ken, especially, found great happiness in portraying Santa Claus for the neighborhood children, wearing the traditional red suit and distributing homemade candy cane ornaments. However, the Martins' sense of community extended beyond the holiday season. During the warmer months, they were known for organizing summer talent shows, parades, and Kool-Aid stands, transforming their neighborhood into a vibrant and inviting place. At the time, their eldest child, Donald, was serving in the United States Navy and was stationed in New York State. On the evening of December 6, 1958, Ken and Barbara attended a Christmas party in Portland. After spending the evening there, they returned home to their address at 1715 Northeast 56th Avenue, situated in the Roseway neighborhood of Northeast Portland. They had already spoken about their plans for the next day, a relaxed Sunday trip into the countryside with their 3 daughters. That Sunday morning on December 7th, Ken declined an invitation from their relatives, the Evans family, who had invited them over for dinner. Ken explained that they already had a busy day arranged and wished to follow through with it. They traveled in their cream and red 1954 Ford Country Squire station wagon, driving east toward the Columbia River Gorge. The plan was straightforward: to gather greenery for homemade Christmas decorations. Yet although the general destination of the family was known, the exact details of their trip remained unclear. Neighbors provided differing accounts. One, Ella Chin, stated she saw them depart around 2 p.m., while another, Frank Womack, remembered the departure being closer to 1:30 p.m. Later that day, the family's vehicle was observed at a gas station in Cascade Locks, approximately 40 miles from their residence. Dean Baxter, the station owner, said he sold the Martins 5 gallons of gasoline around 4 p.m. and watched their car proceed east. Shortly afterward, the Martins were seen at the Paradise Snack Bar in Hood River by waitress Clara York, who recalled serving them. Further unverified sightings placed them along the northern bank of the Columbia River in Washington as evening drew near. Witnesses remembered particular clothing details. Kenneth was wearing a tan jacket and dark trousers. Barbara was dressed in a navy coat, a plaid jacket, and a black print dress. Barbie wore rolled cuff jeans and a beige coat. One of the final reported sightings came from Kelsey and Doris Knutson, who asserted that they saw a vehicle matching the Martins beneath the Bridge of the Gods at dusk. 2 unidentified men were standing outside the car, conversing with the occupants inside. After that point, the family disappeared without any trace. As hours became days with no contact, theories began to surface. Many believed that the Martins had accidentally driven into the Columbia River. Supporting this theory, an amateur investigator named Donald D. Bain discovered tire tracks near a cliff in the Dalles and cream-colored paint fragments below, matching the family's station wagon. However, the distance of the site from the main road created doubt that it was simply an accident. Attempts to search the river in that location encountered opposition. Officers Fred Pierce and Ard Pratt resisted sending divers into the water, citing safety concerns, but others, including diver Lou Smith, assured Detective Walter Graven that the area was safe for experienced divers. At that time, no dive was approved. Then, nearly 5 months later, on May 1, 1959, a drilling rig operating in the river snagged onto something heavy near the Dalles, but was unable to bring it up. The following day, while fishing close to Cascade Locks, Ellery Colby and his wife noticed 2 bodies in the water. They were retrieved and identified as Virginia and Susan Martin, delivering a grim confirmation that the family's destiny had taken a deadly turn. Autopsies concluded that both girls had drowned. However, a technician observed what he believed to be bullet wounds to their heads and reported this observation to Dr. Waterman, the medical examiner. Even so, the official report did not reference such injuries, and no law enforcement or media accounts at the time suggested evidence of foul play. The autopsies also showed that the girls had consumed burgers and fries shortly before their deaths, supporting the earlier statement provided by Clara York. Traces of aluminum were discovered on Susan's clothing, an unusual detail considering that an aluminum plant was located near the spot where the drilling rig had struck something beneath the water. After the bodies were found, Dr. Waterman received anonymous threatening phone calls from an individual warning him not to identify any of the remaining missing members of the Martin family. Both girls were cremated, but their urns remained unclaimed for 10 years. In 1969, someone eventually collected them, although the identity of that person is still unknown. Another theory soon gained momentum, proposing that the family had been kidnapped and intentionally forced over a cliff. In 1961, a Camas resident wrote to the Oregon Journal, describing that they were parked with a companion near Cascade Locks on December 7th when they observed a car drive beneath the railroad tracks toward the locks. Moments later, they heard screams. When they went to investigate, they discovered nothing, but the recollection remained troubling in light of the family's disappearance. Donald Martin, the oldest son and only surviving family member, was residing in New York at the time of the event. Despite the seriousness of the circumstances, he did not return to Oregon to assist in the search for his parents and sisters, stating that his Aunt Charlotte had advised him to stay in New York, though Charlotte denied this and expressed bewilderment over his absence. Donald also did not attend either of his sister's memorial services, later asserting that he had mixed up the dates. As the sole beneficiary of the Martin estate, Donald inherited a total of $36,000, which included a $14,000 double indemnity policy, $6,000 in additional insurance policies, and $13,000 in savings, an amount that would equal more than $370,000 today. Detective Walter Graven became suspicious of Donald, especially after learning details about his troubled past. For years prior to the disappearance, Donald had been terminated from his position at Portland's Meyer and Frank department store for stealing over $2,000 worth of merchandise. In a report, Graven recorded that Donald admitted to the theft, attributing his actions to emotional turmoil. Donald stated that his relationship with his parents had grown strained after he disclosed to them that he was gay. He had allegedly insulted his mother, referring to her as a fat slob, and expressed resentment toward his father. He even stated that he feared his sisters would grow up to resemble them. Further reports indicated that Donald had faced theft accusations in New York and was receiving psychiatric treatment there. When Donald eventually came back to Oregon, he informed investigators that significant documents were missing from his father's desk, including tax returns and a bank ledger. Around that same period, a white 1951 Chevrolet was discovered abandoned in Hood River, not far from the Martins' last known location. The vehicle had been stolen by former convict Lester Kenneth Price, who had taken it from a friend in Venice, California. Close to the abandoned car, a woman's glove was found, but it was determined not to belong to Barbara Martin. Donald died in October 2004 at the age of 73, leaving behind 3 children. He was laid to rest with his wife at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. From the beginning, Multnomah County Police tended to believe that the family had fallen victim to foul play. The tire tracks leading from the edge of the road to the cliff implied that the vehicle might have been deliberately pushed. This contradicted reports that placed the Martins on the north bank of the Columbia River in Washington at dusk, while the physical evidence indicated the south bank in Oregon. Further complicating the case was the arrest of 2 former convicts for car theft the day after the family disappeared, though authorities were unable to establish any link. Detective Graven remained convinced until his death in 1988 that the family's lives had been taken and that the truth would only come to light once their vehicle was retrieved from the river. For decades, the case remained cold. Throughout the latter half of the 20th century, no official recovery attempts were conducted for the missing Martins. In July 1999, journalist Margie Boulette revived interest in the case by organizing a dive search utilizing GPS, sonar, and LiDAR technology near Cascade Locks, but nothing was uncovered. Then, in late 2024, 66 years after the family disappeared, diver Archer Mayo discovered what is believed to be the Martin family's station wagon buried 50 feet beneath the Columbia River. The recovery efforts formally commenced on March 6, 2025. Using a vacuum dredge, crews uncovered portions of the vehicle, including the chassis, rear axle, and engine, which were sent to the Oregon State Crime Lab for additional examination. However, because the vehicle identification number could not be recovered, investigators stated that they cannot confirm with certainty that it was the Martins' vehicle. Hope still persists that the truth behind the disappearance of the Martin family may finally come to light. Moving on to the next case. Laci Peterson. In December 2002, a pregnant wife disappeared from her Modesto, California residence. As loved ones searched desperately and police initiated an investigation, the public looked on in shock as what started as a missing person case swiftly unraveled into something far more sinister. Laci Peterson was born Laci Denise Rocha on May 4, 1975 in Escalon, California, to Sharon and Dennis Robert Rocha. She was the younger of 2 children. When Laci was only 2 years old, her parents divorced and Sharon relocated with her children to Modesto, while Dennis stayed on the family's dairy farm. Laci spent weekends visiting her father at the farm, preserving a link to her rural beginnings. Sharon soon entered a long-term relationship with Ron Gransky, who, although never legally wed to Sharon, became a father figure to Laci and her brother. Laci flourished in her early years, both socially and academically. She became a cheerleader in junior high and continued through high school. She graduated from Thomas Downey High School and pursued further education at California Polytechnic State University. There, she majored in ornamental horticulture. In mid-1994, Laci's life shifted when she met Scott Peterson. Moved by their immediate connection, Laci gave him her phone number and later told her mother that she believed she had met the man she would marry. Scott eventually called, and the two began seeing each other. As their relationship intensified, Scott decided to set aside his aspiration of becoming a professional golfer, choosing instead to concentrate on a stable business career. This marked the start of their serious dedication to building a life together. After dating for 2 years, Laci and Scott moved in together, and in 1997, they married at the Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. Their relationship seemed steady and optimistic as they began married life. In October 2000, they bought a charming 3-bedroom, 2-bath bungalow on Covina Avenue, situated in an upscale neighborhood near East La Loma Park in Modesto. Professionally, the couple appeared well established. Lacey worked part-time as a substitute teacher, a position that matched her nurturing character. Meanwhile, Scott obtained a role with Trade Corp USA, a newly established branch of a European fertilizer company. His job included a monthly salary of $5,000 before taxes, providing the couple with a measure of financial stability as they prepared for the next stage of their life together. In 2002, the couple received happy news. Lacey was expecting a baby. Her due date was February 10, 2003, and they had already selected a name for their unborn son, Connor. As her pregnancy advanced, Lacey embraced the experience with joy and anticipation. Life felt complete and full of promise. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect chapter, an unseen threat loomed, one that Lacey could never have foreseen. On the morning of December 24, 2002, Scott Peterson returned home from a solo fishing trip to the Berkeley Marina, only to discover that his pregnant wife, Lacey, was gone. Alarmed, he contacted Lacey's mother, who immediately reached out to other family members. The family assembled at the Peterson home and began contacting friends and neighbors in search of any information regarding Lacey's whereabouts. As the situation became more serious, Lacey's stepfather, Ron, reached out to the Modesto Police Department and filed a missing person report, initiating the first official actions in what would become a widely publicized investigation. When Modesto police officers arrived at the Peterson residence, they conducted an initial interview with Scott and performed a brief search of the house. Scott told detectives that he had gone fishing for sturgeon at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles from Modesto. He stated that Lacey had been home earlier that morning watching a Martha Stewart television program about meringue, planning to mop the floor, bake cookies, and walk the family dog Mackenzie to a nearby park. He said that when he returned that afternoon, Lacey's vehicle was in the driveway. The house was empty, and he had found Mackenzie alone in the backyard, still wearing his leash. Inside the house, police discovered Lacey's keys, wallet, sunglasses, and purse placed in a closet, prompting questions about her sudden disappearance. As reports of Lacey's disappearance circulated, an extensive search effort rapidly mobilized. On December 25th, more than 900 people, including friends, relatives, and neighbors, took part in the search, canvassing the area and distributing missing person flyers. Authorities announced a $25,000 reward for information regarding Lacey's whereabouts. That figure soon rose to $250,000 and was eventually increased to $500,000 in hopes of generating new leads. Although the case at first lacked solid evidence of foul play, investigators developed mounting suspicions. Scott's demeanor and conduct began attracting scrutiny from detectives, who observed inconsistencies in his statements and actions. As days went by without fresh clues, authorities became increasingly concerned that something more sinister had taken place. Only days after Lacey was reported missing, detectives received a tip that significantly altered the direction of the investigation and placed Scott under intense suspicion. Amber Fry, a massage therapist from Fresno, came forward with shocking information. She told detectives that she had been romantically involved with Scott for more than a month and had believed he was single. On December 30th, Amber revealed that she had met Scott on November 20th and that he had told her he was unattached. Even more disturbingly, she remembered Scott telling her on December 9th, 2 weeks before Lacey disappeared, that he was a widower and that the approaching Christmas would be his first without a wife. Amber's statement dramatically changed the course of the investigation. The timeline she supplied indicated that Scott may have been planning Lacey's crime well in advance of her disappearance. Hoping to obtain incriminating evidence, detectives outfitted Amber with a recording device to capture her conversations with Scott. On April 13th, in 2003, the prolonged search for Lacey and her unborn child came to a tragic conclusion. While walking their dog along the shoreline, 2 individuals found the remains of a male fetus. The fetus was discovered in the San Francisco Bay Area, near the Richmond shoreline. The following day, on April 14th, a jogger came across a partial human torso in the riprap along the Point Isabel shoreline, approximately a mile from where the fetus had been located. The remains were badly decomposed, but their closeness immediately alarmed investigators who had been closely watching the area since Lacey's disappearance. DNA testing confirmed the worst fears of Lacey's family and the investigative team. On April 18th, Forensic analysis confirmed that the two sets of remains were those of Lacey and her unborn son, Connor. The findings marked a turning point in the case, formally transforming it from a missing person investigation into a slaying case. Lacey's remains were in a horrific condition. Her body was swollen and missing major parts, including her head and arms. Her internal organs were also absent, and what remained showed signs of advanced decomposition. An autopsy revealed troubling findings. Lacey had sustained 2 cracked ribs and fractures to her neck bones, though it was unclear whether these injuries happened before or after her death. Despite the extensive damage, her uterus and cervix were found intact, a detail that prompted further questions about the nature and timeline of the crime. The state of her body and the separation of her remains from the fetus posed a complicated forensic challenge. Still, the discovery provided vital evidence that would reinforce the case against Scott. The location of the remains also attracted significant attention. The shoreline where the bodies were discovered was only a few miles from the Berkeley Marina, where Scott said he had gone fishing on the day Lacey disappeared. This geographic link intensified investigators' suspicions and reinforced their focus on Scott as the chief suspect. With the confirmation of Lacey's and Connor's deaths, authorities were able to intensify their investigative efforts and move toward making an arrest. By that time, Scott had been staying in San Diego with his family, saying he was attempting to avoid the relentless media scrutiny surrounding the case. However, his conduct raised further red flags for investigators. On April 18th, the same day the DNA results were verified, police found and arrested Scott at a golf course in San Diego. The circumstances of his arrest only heightened the suspicion surrounding him. At the time he was taken into custody, Scott was carrying more than $10,000 in cash, several cell phones, camping equipment, and his brother's identification. These items indicated the possibility that Scott was preparing to flee or go into hiding, a theory that further justified law enforcement's decision to arrest him. The arrest marked a dramatic shift in the case that had gripped the nation and signaled the start of the legal proceedings against Scott. Scott Peterson was formally arraigned on April 21st on 2 counts of slaying, one for his wife and the other for their unborn son. Although prosecutors believed Scott had planned and carried out the crime, the case lacked direct physical evidence linking him to it. No weapon was recovered, and there were no eyewitnesses to the act. Nonetheless, circumstantial evidence and Scott's behavior after Lacey's disappearance played a significant role in forming the prosecution's case. One of the principal challenges for prosecutors was the timeline. According to Scott, he had left the house that morning to go fishing, and the narrow window of time created doubts about whether he could have committed the crime and disposed of the bodies without being noticed. Some witnesses said they had seen Lacey walking her dog after Scott had already departed for his trip, suggesting she may have been abducted. However, investigators considered these sightings unreliable, pointing to inconsistencies and the absence of supporting details. Despite these questions, the case moved forward to trial. Public interest remained intense throughout the proceedings, and the courtroom was filled with media and spectators as details of the investigation were revealed. On November 12, 2004, the jury delivered its verdict. Scott was found guilty on both counts. On March 16, 2005, Scott was formally sentenced to death by lethal injection. He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he joined hundreds of other inmates on California's death row. Years later, the case would reappear in headlines. In August 2020, the California Supreme Court reviewed Scott's sentence and concluded that significant errors had occurred during jury selection. The court determined that potential jurors had been improperly dismissed for expressing general objections to the death penalty, violating Scott's right to a fair sentencing process. As a result, the court overturned the sentence while leaving the conviction itself in place. Following the ruling, Scott was returned to San Mateo County for resentencing. In December 2021, the court issued its final decision. Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. With that, the legal process reached a new resolution, ensuring Scott would spend the remainder of his life behind bars, even as the emotional wounds from Lacey and Connor's deaths continued to endure. In 2025, more than 20 years after the crime occurred, the case returned to the headlines. In late April, the Los Angeles Innocence Project issued a stunning announcement. The nonprofit stated in a court filing that after a year-long investigation, it had discovered new evidence that dismantles the prosecution's theory of what happened and demonstrates Scott's innocence. The Los Angeles Innocence Project presents new evidence showing that a house across the street from the Petersons was burglarized on the day of Lacey's disappearance, and that a witness reportedly overheard a conversation between the burglars indicating that Lacey saw them and confronted them. The organization also says it has secured new sworn statements from witnesses who reported seeing Lacey in the neighborhood after prosecutors claimed that Scott ended her life. It further contends that it has uncovered new evidence connecting the burglars to a van that was set on fire nearby and contained a mattress inside with apparent bloodstains. The filing asserts that the prosecution withheld evidence of the police investigation into that incident, and that it has not been subjected to more advanced DNA testing to establish a connection to Lacey's case. A central argument from last month's filing stresses that new research and techniques used to determine fetal growth indicate that the Petersons' unborn child was older than the prosecution's expert witness, Dr. Gregory DeVore, stated, suggesting that Lacey's life was ended days later than the prosecution alleged. Included in the petition was a declaration from Scott describing his conduct in his marriage, while denying he had any role in the deaths of his wife and their unborn child. He wrote, "I have steadfastly maintained my innocence from the moment my wife went missing on December 24, 2002, throughout my trial, appeal, and post-conviction proceedings, and to this day. I had absolutely nothing to do with the disappearance and deaths of my wife and son. Now it is up to the court to determine whether Scott will be granted a new trial." Moving on to the next case. Shinera Mobley. On July 10, 1998, within the hushed stillness of a hospital room in Jacksonville, Florida, a life-changing event took place. 16-year-old Shinera Mobley held her newborn daughter, Kamaya, in her arms, her heart brimming with love and hope for the future they would share. She had no idea that within the corridors of the hospital, a sinister scheme was about to unfold. A stranger posing as a nurse walked into Shinera's room, offering reassurance and companionship. But in a single moment, the happiness of motherhood turned into agony as this imposter seized Shinera's precious baby girl and disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a broken dream and a devastated mother, who might have taken little Kamaya from her mother. Would Kamaya ever be located? What might have been the motive behind such a merciless act? Only 16 years old, Shinera Mobley found herself suddenly entering motherhood when she delivered her first child, a daughter, on July 10, 1998, at the University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida. She gave her the name Kamaya. Just 8 hours after Shinera delivered Kamaya on the morning of July 10, 1998, a nurse came into her hospital room. She remained with Shinera for several hours, talking with her and keeping her company. During this period, Shinera shared that Kamaya's father, 19-year-old Craig Aiken, was incarcerated on a charge of sexual assault because Shinera had been F*****ked when he impregnated her, and also for drug possession and distribution. Yet although it appeared that the road ahead for Shinera and Kamaya would be challenging, Shinera felt excited about the new chapter in her life. At approximately 3 p.m. that same day, the woman told Shinera that she needed to briefly remove the baby from the room to check her temperature. At that moment, Shinera's mother had just arrived in the room to see her little granddaughter for the first time. However, she was only able to get a brief look at her before the nurse carried her away for what they assumed was routine hospital procedure. As Shinera's mother checked on her, and the two engaged in conversation, unaware that the tragedy had already occurred, they noticed that quite some time had passed since the nurse had taken Kamaya away. They asked the other hospital staff about the nurse and discovered that the hospital had no employee who fit the description of the nurse who had taken Kamaya. Shinera's heart shattered when she understood that her child had been abducted. Shinera and her mother promptly reached out to the Jacksonville Police Department and reported the event. The mission to locate the baby drew the attention of the entire nation. The kidnapper was described as a woman between the ages of 25 and 47. She was dressed in a nurse's floral print jacket, teal scrubs, and surgical gloves, as captured in grainy surveillance footage from the Jacksonville hospital. Investigators determined that the woman had entered the hospital and misled the staff by claiming she was a member of the Mobley family and later introduced herself to Shinera as a medical professional. After the abduction, the University Medical Center in Jacksonville put additional security measures in place, including wristbands and ankle bands for newborns. They limited access to the maternity ward and enhanced security procedures, including conducting kidnapping drills. Meanwhile, as the search for Kamaya went on, Shanner pursued legal action against the hospital and received a $1.5 million settlement. However, her deepest wish to be reunited with her daughter remained unmet. Detectives stated that in the 18 years following Kamaya's disappearance, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received over 2,500 tips. Although the original detectives assigned to the case eventually retired, new detectives continued the investigation with steadfast determination. Nevertheless, there were still numerous obstacles. Because not even a single photograph of Kamaya had been taken before she was abducted, a computer-generated composite image was created to be distributed to the media. Distinctive characteristics such as Mongolian spots and an umbilical hernia were emphasized in these reports. A reward of $250,000 was also offered to anyone who could return Kamaya home. Yet despite the combined efforts of detectives and the general public, the kidnapper eluded capture and remained free. In the following years, all leads regarding Kamaya's abduction went cold. Although the investigation stayed open, the case of Kamaya would not be resolved until nearly 2 decades later. The extensive search for baby Kamaya Mobley concluded in January 2017 when the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office pursued leads that eventually directed them to Walterboro, South Carolina. At some point in 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had received information concerning a woman named Gloria Williams and her daughter Alexis, whose identification documents showed certain inconsistencies. The center forwarded this information to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Gloria and Alexis had been living in Walterboro, a small city with a population of roughly 5,400, located about 50 miles west of Charleston. Acting on these leads, cold case detectives from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office traveled to Walterboro, South Carolina, where they met Gloria's daughter, 18-year-old Alexis Kelly Meningo. What raised suspicion for the detectives was the fact that Alexis shared the same birthdate as Kamaya. Soon, detectives discovered that Alexis's identity had been established using fraudulent documents. Alexis was required to submit a swab test, and her DNA was compared to a sample of Kamaya's DNA, which had been collected at the time of her birth in 1998. On the night of January 12, 2017, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Laboratory confirmed that the woman known as Alexis was in fact Kamaya herself. Following the confirmation that Kamaya was Shanara Mobley's daughter through DNA testing, the Sheriff's Office took legal action against Gloria. On January 13, 2017, Gloria was arrested on charges of kidnapping and interference with custody. Gloria chose to waive extradition during court proceedings and was transported to Jacksonville to face trial for the charges. She was ordered to be held and detained without bond. Notably, when detectives examined Gloria's past, they discovered that she had previous encounters with law enforcement, having faced charges related to check and welfare fraud. Gloria admitted that in 1998, she had traveled from South Carolina to Florida, posing as a nurse to abduct Kamaya from her birth mother. At the time, Gloria was trapped in an abusive relationship, had lost custody of her 2 sons, and had recently suffered a miscarriage, all factors that contributed to her motive. Upon returning to South Carolina with Kamaya, Gloria fabricated a new identity for her, naming her Alexis Kelly Meningo and presenting her as her own biological daughter. None of Gloria's relatives found this suspicious, since the last time they had seen Gloria, she had been pregnant. Unaware of her miscarriage, Gloria's family never questioned her when she introduced Kamaya as Alexis, her own daughter. Kamaya lived in South Carolina all those years under the alias Alexis and was raised alongside Gloria Williams's other 2 children. She had graduated from Colleton County High School and was even in a relationship with her devoted boyfriend. At age 16, Kamaya discovered the truth about her abduction while attempting to apply for a job and realizing she lacked a social security number. This prevented her from legally working or obtaining a driver's license. It was at that point that Gloria chose to reveal the reality behind Kamaya's missing documentation. While Kamaya understood that what Gloria had done was wrong, she still loved and respected her for the life Gloria had provided. Kamaya struggled with the fear of losing the woman she had known as her mother all her life, and therefore chose to keep the entire truth to herself. January 13, 2017, the day of Gloria's arrest, marked a pivotal moment for Shannara Mobley, as she finally discovered that her firstborn, Kamaya, was alive and safe. Although Shannara and Craig had separated after Kamaya's abduction, Shannara went on to have 5 more children: LaShawn, Christopher, Christiana, Savannah, and Journey. Yet seeing Kamaya, her firstborn, 18 years after her abduction, was an overwhelmingly emotional experience for her. Kamaya connected with her father and grandmother through FaceTime, eagerly planning to reunite in person with her biological family. She had never met her biological father, who had been incarcerated at the time of her birth. She traveled to Florida to meet her biological parents, Shannara and Craig, along with her 5 younger siblings, beginning the journey of building relationships with them. Simultaneously, she maintained bonds with those she had known as her family all these years, her brothers and grandparents in South Carolina, as well as with Gloria. During this period, some news outlets suggested that Shannara and Kamaya's mother-daughter relationship was facing challenges due to Kamaya's love for Gloria. However, members of the Mobley family immediately dismissed these claims, calling them false and baseless. During Gloria's trial, many people believed that since Gloria had provided Kamaya a good life, her crime was not as severe. Others countered that Gloria had kidnapped Kamaya and that she had never been her child to raise. Meanwhile, Kamaya refused to label Gloria a felon. Though Gloria had kidnapped her 18 years prior, she had also raised her with genuine love and care. In February 2018, Gloria pleaded guilty to the kidnapping charge and admitted to acting alone in the 1998 abduction. Later, on June 8, 2018, Gloria was sentenced to 18 years in prison for the kidnapping of Kamaya Mobley. As part of her plea agreement, Gloria was barred from profiting from her crime while incarcerated, preventing her from participating in any book, television, or entertainment contracts. Following her sentencing by the Duval County Court, Kamaya continued to reside in her childhood home. She also continued to maintain contact with Gloria, still regarding her as a mother figure. In March 2022, Gloria filed an appeal seeking to have her sentence reduced to 9 years. Gloria argued that her 18-year prison sentence was an excessively harsh and unusual punishment. She claimed that at the time of the crime, she had recently suffered a traumatic miscarriage, was displaying symptoms consistent with postpartum depression, and was experiencing severe mental and emotional distress. She maintained that she was not of sound mind during the abduction. The appeal also included a handwritten letter from Kamaya supporting the motion. In the letter, Kamaya stated that she wanted to make it very clear that Gloria was still her mother and always would be. Despite this, Gloria's request for a reduced sentence was denied. While serving her sentence at the Hernando Correctional Institution, Gloria has enrolled in a master's degree program in business administration through Adams State University in Colorado and has participated in community service. Her release date is scheduled for July 9, 2034, just 1 day before Kamaya's 36th birthday. Kamaya's entire world was turned upside down within moments when she learned the truth. Although Shannara was her biological mother, it was Gloria who had raised her with love and care. Kamaya did not want to choose only one family to belong to, and so she worked hard to make the best of her situation. She has mentioned that she has maintained regular communication with both Gloria and her biological family in Florida. She now responds to both of her names depending on her location. She prefers Alexis in South Carolina and Kamaya in Florida. While official documents such as job applications and Social Security records use the name given by her birth mother, Kamaya explained in an interview with ABC's Good Morning America that her paperwork lists the name Kamaya Mobley, even though her work name tag reads Alexis. Shannara, Kamaya's biological mother, has described the complicated dynamic between herself and Kamaya, who still sees Gloria as her mother. Because of this, Shannara often felt that she wished Kamaya had never returned. Seeing her own daughter longing for Gloria's motherly love made Shannara feel as though she was losing Kamaya a little more each day. As long as Kamaya could visit Gloria, Gloria remained her mother. Shannara did not feel that Kamaya's return was a victory for her in any way and found herself in greater emotional pain. To ease the situation, Shannara even considered referring to Kamaya as Alexis. Shannara has expressed her wish for Gloria to remain behind bars for the remainder of her life, hoping this would allow her and Kamaya to concentrate on rebuilding their relationship. Meanwhile, Gloria herself has taken steps to maintain some distance from Kamaya so that she could spend more time with her biological family. Despite these challenges, Shannara and Kamaya remain committed to repairing their bond and focusing on making up for the time they have lost. Moving on to the next case. The case of Stott family. In June 2013, the personnel at a medical facility in Springfield, Missouri encountered a difficult circumstance when they admitted 24-year-old Sarah Stott. She was in a critical state, slipping into unconsciousness and screaming in pain whenever she regained awareness. Physicians determined that she was suffering from a brain hemorrhage and kidney failure, which caused her organs to operate unpredictably. They found it hard to comprehend her swiftly worsening condition. The battle to save Sarah's life continued for several days until an anonymous tip was received. The caller disclosed that the Stott family had been afflicted by unexplained illnesses for a year, which had already taken the lives of Sarah's father, Mark, and her brother, Sean. Both had passed away without obtaining medical treatment, and now it appeared that Sarah would be next. Fortunately, she had been admitted to the medical facility, providing her with a possibility of survival. Law enforcement began examining the unusual illnesses impacting the Stott family, suspecting that it was more than mere coincidence. The family consisted of 6 members: Mark, Diane, and their children Sean, and 3 daughters, Sarah, Rachel, and the 9-year-old girl. Mark Stott, born in St. Louis in 1951, met Diane while attending school in Texas. In spite of their differences, they quickly discovered shared interests and started dating. Mark was hopeful and creative, performing in a band, whereas Diane was quieter and more introverted. Their relationship advanced quickly, resulting in an unplanned pregnancy, after which they chose to get married. After Sean was born, Diane continued her studies, completed nursing school, and started working in a hospital's cardiology department. In comparison, Mark became a stay-at-home father, overseeing household duties and looking after the children. It seemed that Diane placed her career first, aiming to support the family. To pursue better employment prospects, they moved to Springfield, Missouri, a peaceful town suitable for raising children. This town was also Diane's hometown, conservative and religious, which made her feel protected and secure. In the years that followed, they welcomed 3 daughters. To those on the outside, they seemed like the perfect family, but beneath the surface, they confronted considerable difficulties. Sean, their son, dealt with health problems from an early age and was diagnosed with autism during his school years, which required specialized assistance. Despite the father's attempts, the daughters also faced academic challenges at school, especially Sarah. The family's greatest difficulty was financial. They simply lacked sufficient funds to sustain their expanding household. One income was not enough to cover their expenses, and they had to find a new residence because their current one did not have adequate space. Occasionally contributed to the family's finances by taking on temporary jobs, such as bartending. However, he mainly concentrated on caring for the children. During his spare time, he followed his passion for music, composing songs and playing different instruments. He eventually started performing with a musical band, which brought in some income, but it was still insufficient for their large household. In spite of their hardships, they appeared ready to confront their difficulties together until April 8, 2012, the day following Mark's birthday. In the family home lay Mark's lifeless body. His wife stated that he had died from a mysterious illness similar to the flu, which advanced quickly. She remained by his side to comfort him, but regardless of her efforts, Mark's health declined severely. His body even looked unusual, with his skin developing a yellowish hue. Diane stated that on the day Mark passed away, he suffered a seizure, something he had never experienced before. She ascribed this to his age. When the seizure happened, she intended to take Mark to the hospital, but he maintained that he wished to remain at home and rest. Despite his preference, she began getting ready to leave. By the time she was prepared, she discovered him unresponsive. 45 minutes after the seizure, she contacted emergency services. After a brief examination, nothing appeared suspicious, and the death certificate assigned his passing to natural causes associated with his age. At this point, their son Sean was deeply worried about his father's health. He recorded all of Mark's symptoms on social media and challenged the idea that his death was due to natural causes. Diane asked that her husband be cremated, and his ashes were dispersed over a nearby lake close to the church. Mark's passing stunned everyone. He had been strong and healthy, which made his sudden death even more baffling. 5 months later, in September 2012, the police were summoned to another residence for comparable reasons. This bigger house was better suited for the family. Diane resided there with her children after selling their former home and obtaining an insurance payout following her husband's death. On that day, Diane discovered her 26-year-old son, Sean, deceased in his room. His death reflected the flu that had taken his father's life. After her husband's death, Diane became more attentive and brought Sean to the doctor when he began displaying symptoms. However, doctors detected nothing concerning, only an imbalance of fluids. Despite Sean's declining state, Diane stopped bringing him to the doctor, asserting that he refused medical assistance and felt uneasy, which she linked to his autism. The evening before he passed away, Sean appeared to improve, causing Diane to think his mysterious illness was subsiding. She went to church with her daughters to pray on his behalf. When they came back, they discovered Sean unresponsive, apparently having attempted to rise from bed and fallen, leaving a pool of blood on the floor. His abrupt death stunned everyone. Sean was employed at a center for individuals with disabilities and was recognized for his positive and amiable personality. Like his father, Sean was cremated, and his ashes were scattered over a lake. Roughly 9 months later, in June 2013, Sarah, the eldest daughter in the family, was admitted to the hospital with symptoms similar to those that had led to the deaths of her brother and father. The police reached the hospital 2 days after Sarah had been admitted in critical condition. While doctors were doing everything possible to save her, they were unable to provide the police with any specific details. They were still attempting to determine the cause of her unusual illness, which resembled the flu, but it was troubling that both her kidneys and brain had failed. The medical team performed numerous tests, and there was an unspoken concern that Sarah might have been poisoned. The police were contacted by an anonymous caller from the church the Stott family attended, where Diane had served as the organist for many years. The pastor believed these events were not simple coincidences and feared that a murderer might be responsible, so he chose to contact the police. He conveyed his concerns that Mark's death and Sarah's worsening condition could be linked. The pastor considered Mark's death especially suspicious, noting that he had been healthy shortly before he died under comparable circumstances. He was starting to suspect Diane's involvement in these tragic events. During this period, Diane insisted that her daughter was merely ill while presenting herself as a grieving widow, a mother lamenting loved ones who were dying under mysterious circumstances. This conduct helped her receive substantial support from the religious community. However, the pastor believed Diane was intentionally sustaining this facade to avoid difficult questions. When Diane last visited her daughter in the hospital, her demeanor shifted noticeably. The nurses observed that she appeared to be in good spirits. She joked and spoke more about an upcoming trip to Florida than about her daughter's grave health problems, despite the doctor's alarming prognosis. They were unsure whether the girl would survive this mysterious illness. The mother's apparent lack of concern only intensified the authorities' suspicions toward her. Diane was asked to voluntarily come to the police station for a conversation. On June 20, 2013, she went to the police department. By that time, Sarah's condition had somewhat stabilized, but none of the medical examinations revealed any toxins in her system. It seemed that any dangerous substances had been entirely metabolized and left no evidence behind. The detectives understood they needed to exercise great caution when speaking with a possible poisoner. Meanwhile, they were unable to conduct many tests on Sarah because of her deteriorating condition. They continued to hope that Sarah would recover and supply information for the investigation. The detectives sought to comprehend the events preceding the victims' illnesses and collect clues regarding the causes of their declining health. The circumstances resembled what had occurred with Sean. On that tragic day, Diane had gone to church with her other daughters, and upon returning home, she realized that her eldest daughter, Sarah, was severely ill. Before this, Sarah had been experiencing mild symptoms similar to those of her brother and father, so Diane did not initially panic. Diane believed they would be able to assist Sarah once she returned home, and she eventually sent Sarah to the hospital. The first thing Diane questioned was whether her daughter had attempted to take her own life. Sarah had bipolar disorder, which meant she might have harmed herself. Diane examined all the medications accessible to her daughter and maintained that Sarah had tried to end her life several times in the past. It appeared as though Diane was urgently attempting to convince the police to accept her viewpoint. The officers did not tell Diane that they were also examining the deaths of Mark and Sean because they wanted to avoid alerting a potential suspect. During this period, Diane behaved strangely. While answering questions, she stated that Sarah had been a challenging child, was having difficulty securing employment, and was not performing well in school, even as tuition bills were accumulating. This seemed like an effort to rationalize her actions, which felt inappropriate considering that her daughter was struggling for her life in the hospital. Additionally, Diane conveyed resentment toward her husband, who seldom worked and spent his spare time on recreational activities. The detective simply listened as she continued to express her thoughts and emotions. Diane admitted that she had consistently regarded Sarah as a burden because of her bipolar disorder. In spite of this, Sarah remained living with the family and had no plans to move out. Diane disclosed that for a long period, she had even hoped that Sarah would take her own life. Diane repeatedly maintained that she did not harm her loved ones. Ultimately, she delivered an unexpected confession to the detectives. She claimed that her husband and children had been consuming antifreeze. This disclosure was important because antifreeze poisoning is extremely dangerous, and its symptoms can resemble those of many other substances, making it difficult to detect. It results in a slow and agonizing death. Diane admitted that she had also consumed antifreeze herself, after observing her family partake in it for some unknown reason. Naturally, the detectives did not accept these ridiculous claims. Suspicions soon began to be validated when they reviewed her browser search history. It was revealed that long before Mark's death, she had started looking up information about the signs and techniques of poisoning, including antifreeze. She was evidently choosing the most effective and discreet method for murder, exploring different medications, minerals, and essential oils that have a suppressive effect on the body. Several search queries were highly incriminating, for instance, how to kill your husband, or how individuals with bipolar disorder commit, and one's own life. This pointed to premeditated murder well before Mark passed away. When questioned about all of this during a subsequent meeting, Diane rejected any responsibility. She acknowledged that her husband's death did not occur as originally described. When the seizure happened, she was certain that Mark would not survive. According to Diane, she acted this way because she despised her husband. Everyone characterized the man as very kind-hearted. Most likely, the hatred arose from the couple's handling of the family finances. Diane simply could no longer cope with the pressures at work, yet she could never rely on her husband's assistance. She experienced a similar form of hatred toward her son Sean. She could not stand to look at him. Sean was merely seeking compassion and affection from his mother, but instead she would drive him out of the room. Whenever Sean entered, he sensed that something was wrong, particularly when he looked into his father's illness. After Mark died, she understood that she could no longer endure her sick son, so she started mistreating him daily. Diane asserted that it took only a few days for his body to give in, but that was untrue. The boy was painfully dying for more than a week before he finally departed from this world. Now her focus and frustration turned toward her eldest daughter, whom Diane regarded as the primary issue in the family. Sarah was spending excessive amounts of money on her education, but it was destined to fail because of her lack of ability. Sarah aspired to become a French translator, took out a student loan, and shortly after finishing college, she was required to begin repaying it. However, there were no employment opportunities for Sarah, and her mother refused to cover her debts. Diane resented Sarah for being unable to secure a job and resolve her financial difficulties. For several days before Sarah was hospitalized, her mother began mixing antifreeze into her meals. At the police station, Diane confessed that she sent her daughter to the hospital so quickly because she could no longer tolerate witnessing her suffering. Naturally, Diane felt no compassion. In reality, she had been preparing beverages ahead of time that were nearly half antifreeze. Diane had hidden bottles of cola capable of killing up to 30 people at once, according to experts. All of this was kept in the refrigerator to systematically poison her family, which appeared extremely disturbing, especially considering that there were 2 other daughters in the house. However, Diane was not worried that her younger daughter might accidentally consume this drink, as her plans included murdering the girl immediately after Sarah. But to convict Diane, concrete evidence was required. Despite the cremation of her husband and son, some remains of Mark and Sean could still be located. After performing autopsies, the detectives proposed analyzing the remains to determine whether the lethal substance had left traces in their bodies. The examinations revealed the presence of ethylene glycol, one of the primary ingredients of antifreeze. Before taking the poisoner into custody, the police chose to determine whether she had an accomplice, since it would have been challenging to execute everything alone. It is difficult to comprehend how the suspect succeeded in keeping all her close family members unaware of her intentions. The detectives apprehended Diane without notifying her and then interrogated her second daughter, Rachel. They informed Rachel that her mother had admitted to poisoning Sarah, which caused Rachel to become extremely nervous. It was clear that she knew more than she was revealing. The detectives sought to question Rachel to obtain a deeper understanding of the family's circumstances. Even prior to Diane's confession, Rachel had been behaving strangely, laughing and making inappropriate jokes about the deaths of family members, but she did not admit to anything. As suspicions intensified, the police repeatedly searched the Stodd family residence and uncovered a diary belonging to Rachel, which turned out to be extremely revealing. In one disturbing entry, Rachel noted that soon both her father and brother would pass away. She reassured herself with the idea of receiving money and her father's car. Disturbingly, this entry was dated 6 months before Mark's death, showing that Rachel was aware of her mother's alarming intentions and made no attempt to stop her or alert anyone. It seemed that she was satisfied with the notion of her entire family dying in the near future. When Rachel was confronted with the diary, she was visibly shocked. She soon broke down and confessed that she had been cooperating with her mother, Diane, who was the poisoner, from the very beginning. Their partnership started when Rachel helped Diane search for methods and poisons on the internet. They found that antifreeze, which is sold in stores with a bittering agent to prevent accidental ingestion, could be ordered online for their harmful scheme. Diane would make poisoned food and beverages, which Rachel would then serve to her father, brother, and even sister. In her confession, Rachel explained that they poisoned each family member as many as 3 times daily. Rachel shared the closest bond with her mother and had always been the preferred daughter, much like Diane, who despised the others and regarded them as burdens. Together, they resolved to remove the remaining members of the family and begin a new life. 1 month after Mark's death, Rachel startled family friends by writing on social media, "I think I haven't seen my mother this relaxed in a very long time." This indicated that they were satisfied with the result. Rachel disclosed that they had talked through each murder thoroughly and concluded that Mark had to die. However, she was unsure about Sean. She felt he did not need to be killed and could instead be permanently placed in a specialized care facility. Rachel even disputed with her mother regarding Sean, at first resisting the idea of his death, but ultimately agreeing that it would be better to remove him. It appeared to be a joint effort between mother and daughter in carrying out their plans. Rachel stated that she was taken aback by Sarah's poisoning. She believed the motives were neither financial nor connected to the previous deaths, but rather arose from a minor disagreement. Sarah frequently argued with their mother, who considered her extremely irritating. Concerning the 9-year-old girl, Rachel made unclear statements suggesting that the child was also perceived as a burden, which added to the intention to eliminate her as well. Diane was told about Rachel's confession and urged to reveal the full truth. She consented to do so. According to Diane, her bitterness toward her husband began because he was emotionally withdrawn and failed to connect with her. She was also angered by his extravagant spending and his inability to provide financial support for the family. Diane accused him of physical and verbal abuse, along with domestic violence, yet these accusations were not confirmed by anyone who knew him closely. In an effort to justify herself, she alleged that he had been unfaithful. However, none of Mark's close friends, whom he met nearly every day, validated these allegations. Even Rachel's diary recorded that their father was a dedicated family man, implying that he would rather hurt himself than harm anyone else. Although Rachel and Diane voiced persistent feelings of resentment, detectives concluded that the motive behind the murders was more direct. In particular, life insurance policies had been secured on each family member, with payouts issued after Mark's death. This enabled the widow to purchase a bigger, more comfortable house, signaling the beginning of their calculated scheme. Rachel had also set up additional insurance policies that she planned to claim. Her diary documented her worries about the circumstances, which were carefully reviewed during the proceedings. Ultimately, Diane admitted that they had chosen to bring Sarah to the hospital while not doing the same for the other 2 victims, because Rachel simply wanted to ensure that no one else died in the new house. They were not concerned about Sarah's death. Instead, they regarded a dying loved one as a burden, just like the others. Rachel justified her conduct by describing her intense anxieties connected to her deceased brother. She clearly remembered the traumatic sight of him lying on the floor, blood at his mouth, with cold, pale hands and vacant eyes. After that, she moved into his room and frequently wrote in her diary about her increased anxiety and the nightmares she endured, in which Sean appeared. Both Rachel and Diane were taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder, and they were refused bail. The Lutheran Redeemer Church, attended by the Stott family, released a supportive statement on behalf of all parishioners during this difficult period. Interestingly, although the pastor had reported his suspicions to the police and initiated the support letter, he continued to pray for their souls. Rachel accepted accountability for her actions and agreed to testify against her mother, admitting to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of attempted second-degree murder. She was given 2 life sentences, but would be eligible to request parole after 42 years. During her sentencing, Rachel apologized to her sister Sarah, who survived the poisoning and underwent extensive rehabilitation to relearn how to walk and speak. Later, Rachel sought a reduction of her sentence, requesting a new trial. She asserted that she had been pressured by her male attorney and had not received a psychiatric assessment, emphasizing her mental health concerns. However, her appeal was rejected in 2018, and she made no further attempts to reduce her sentence. Diane Stott was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Throughout the trial, she employed ambiguous language and never completely acknowledged her guilt. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In one of her final interviews, Diane claimed she was not accountable for Mark's death, attributing it to his alcohol addiction and prohibited substance use. She said that he had associations with dangerous individuals, which resulted in his suffering. At that time, she harbored such intense hatred toward her husband that she did not wish to assist him. When Mark passed away, she felt a sense of relief. However, there was no proof to substantiate Diane's allegations about Mark's dependency, and her revised account conflicted with diary entries and Rachel's statements, causing others to question her credibility. Sarah's life was permanently altered due to severe poisoning, and she will never entirely recover. She now lives in a specialized care facility and has a legal guardian. Sarah dreams about her late father and brother, believing they are like guardian angels watching over her. She has forgiven her mother and sister and does not harbor any bitterness toward them. Her strong faith keeps her committed, and she spends much of her time at church. Sarah hopes to fulfill her dreams of becoming a French translator and traveling to Paris. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.